Knowledge versus experience. Which one would you rather have and which one is most important? That's what we're going to talk about today on the Behind the Spacebar podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Behind the Spacebar. This is the podcast for musicians, music directors, playback techs, really anyone performing on stage with Ableton Live. Now, some days we have episodes where we dive deep on technical aspects of running tracks using Ableton Live on stage. Some days it's just simply a angry rant from Uncle Will. Hopefully we have less and less of those. And then some days it's today's episode. It's a bit of a kind of workshop on a general topic that I think matters in the field of being a musician, being someone who gets paid for your craft, for your skill, being a playback tech. And so today we're talking about knowledge versus experience. And I started the episode asking the question, which one is better? Which one would you rather have? Would you rather know a lot about a subject, or would you rather have a lot of experience with that subject? Take just a second, like for real, you're listening to this in your car on the way to work, you're listening to this at home, maybe while you're working. If you can, just pause for a second and really think about that, because I think it's an interesting question. And you may know where I'm going with this. It's an interesting question when you really stop to think about it. What's more important, knowledge versus experience? Because if we kind of walk this out and we think through it, it's hard to get into a field. It's hard for me to be a playback tech if I don't have knowledge about how to use Ableton Live. But no matter how much knowledge I have about Ableton Live, if I've never actually ran tracks on stage, if I've never actually stood off stage running tracks, it's going to be hard for me to relate to experience that. So think about it just for a moment. Which one's more important, knowledge or experience? And here's what I want to present to you today. Here's kind of what I want to discuss is I think both of those are highly important. And I think both of those are highly valued. And they're both skills that we have to develop in ourselves. And I think for those of us watching this, those of us listening to this, if you're listening over on the Apple Podcast or Spotify, wherever you happen to be listening, it's possible you're listening to this in one of two places. Similar to a previous episode where we talked about creative and technical skills, I think both of these are important. We have to have knowledge and we have to have experience, but I think all of us naturally have a little bit of more of one than the other. And I think there's some downsides when you have more knowledge than experience, and I think there's some downsides when you have more experience than knowledge. So what I want to do today, just as quickly as possible, I'm going to try to make this a quick episode, is just kind of break down each of these, what each of these mean, and give some pointers, some encouragement if you are heavy on the knowledge and low on the experience, and if you're heavy on the experience and low on the knowledge. Okay, so let's start at the top. Let's start with knowledge. Here's the first kind of point I want to make, that I want to throw out there. Knowledge doesn't equal experience, okay? Knowledge does not equal experience. Here's an example I always go back to. Here's a story I always go back to. And I believe, if I remember, this came from my buddy Ill Factor from Beat Academy. He told this story of being in a studio, and he was interning for a audio engineer, a mixer. And someone came in, kind of hotshot kid that knew everything, had a lot of knowledge. And as the engineer is working, he's kind of looking over his shoulder, and he's like, no, that's not the shortcut. If you do this, that shortcut is going to help you, blah, 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 blah. And I just remember him kind of saying that the engineer looked at it like, who is this kid? Like, who does this kid think it is? Like, this is a Grammy award-winning engineer that's working, and there's some kid off the street that's going, oh, you need to do this versus that. Now, that's less of the fact that this kid had knowledge and less experience, and maybe it's more of self-awareness, right? So I think that's a piece of it. Maybe that's an episode for a whole nother day. But yes, he should have awareness that he didn't have enough self-awareness to know that this isn't the time or the place to do that. But in that case, that was someone who had a lot of knowledge, but not a lot of experience. I think a flaw of those of us that have more knowledge than experience typically is I think we tend to be a little on the prideful side of things. We tend to look at what other people are doing and always go, psh, I could do that better. Psh, there's a better way to do that. I think for those of us that are, and I'm actually going to make a note to link to this because I didn't put this in my notes, but there was an episode a couple weeks ago that I think is super, super crucial. I said it's a secret that I wish I knew years and years ago when it comes to running tracks, but it applies to life, which is context is king. Context is everything. Those of us that are heavy on the knowledge think we know the best way to do everything, think we know the right approach, but we need to pause and sometimes take a moment just to understand the context in which we're working in, understand why that keyboard shortcut that engineer is using may actually be the best way. Those of us that are heavy on knowledge and low on experience also need to just put a little more emphasis on experience and realize that the process of just doing, the process of creating shapes you and it makes you better. And you start to learn that almost, and I don't want to say this because the knowledge piece of me kind of is pained to say this or say it, sometimes it's better to do it the way that takes a little bit longer, but do that over and over and over, than it is to do it the quote unquote right way just one time, right? Because again, with all this knowledge, we have to realize that experience is very valuable as well too. Okay, I got a couple pointers here. A couple things. If you are heavy on the knowledge, low on the experience, here's what I encourage you to do. Apply your knowledge. Learn to apply your knowledge. So find opportunities to say, I know these Ableton Live keyboard shortcuts. I've gone through, subscribed to From Studio to Stage. I watched Will's tracks 101, 201, 301. I need to apply my knowledge. Number two, put it into practice. So what I mean by that is, again, you've learned, your head is full of knowledge. Put it into practice, right? Try it. Even if, again, I believe we talked about this on how to get started as a playback tech, even if you have to offer your services for free and go to a band and say, hey, I'd love to play, run tracks for you guys for a show, couple shows. I'm going to do this as a career. Eventually I'm going to have to charge, but for you guys, I'd love to do this free, right? Throw yourself out there, apply your knowledge, find yourself an opportunity to put your knowledge into practice. Because what you're going to start to see, again, like I said, is that experience is really going to shape and it's going to sharpen your knowledge. So you can know everything, but if you never put it into practice, then it just kind of stays in this useless bucket, right? Knowledge without experience is not very helpful to me, right? I want to take my knowledge and I want to share that and I want to get that out and I want to put it into practice. Number three, though, so two, let's go back. Your knowledge will be shaped by your experience. You're going to go, oh, I understand that. But something that's very valuable to me, and I'm so grateful and I'm so thankful that I have had a career where I've been in a lot of different contexts. Number three, expose yourself to different contexts and different experiences. Because here's what I can say is, for me, running tracks by myself, for myself as a worship leader at a very small church without a band was a different experience than running tracks as a worship leader with a band at a small church. And what I can say is, going from that scenario to years later, running tracks in a stadium full of 30,000 plus people for an event where there's a lot of media synced to tracks, full band on stage, again, stadium full of people. I am off stage running tracks is a different experience than those early experiences. Standing on stage, playing electric guitar, running tracks was a different experience than standing off stage. Technically, I was standing in front of house when I did that playback gig, but standing front of house, just doing tracks. Playing an instrument and doing tracks is a different experience than just doing tracks. And then for me, too, connecting the dots, formatting a set for a church that's doing a Christmas thing where there's a lot of tempo, time signature changes is a completely different experience than I'm working with an artist that's an electronic music producer and taking their songs from the studio to the stage, right? And doing tracks for a live album recording is way different than doing tracks in a live experience where you can repeat, you can do different things. Context really has shaped my knowledge, right? I think I am very heavy on the knowledge side. I think I'm also, again, very blessed and fortunate that I'm heavy on the experience side. But there's some experiences I have not had, some experiences I may never have. We'll see, life isn't over yet. So we'll see if I get those experiences. But what I can say is the experiences I've had have shaped my knowledge and they've allowed me to understand the importance of context. Again, going back to that episode, context is king. Again, I'm going to make a note here to link to that episode in the show notes. But context is king here. You've got to take your knowledge, you've got to apply your knowledge, you got to, number two, put it into practice. Number three, you've got to expose yourself to different contexts and different experiences. Okay, here's something, when it comes to knowledge, the best thing you can do, subscribe to the From Studio Stage YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button, enable the bell icon every single day. If you're interested in growing your knowledge, if that matters to you, every single day, 10 a.m. Central, I post a brand new tutorial showing you how to use Ableton Live on stage to perform like a pro with Ableton Live. Hit that subscribe button, enable the bell icon. If you're listening over on Apple Podcasts, then you can't see that I just switched camera angles to try to keep you engaged in the conversation. But what you could do to grow in your knowledge is to subscribe to the podcast over on Apple Podcasts. Do me a favor, leave a rating or review. That helps a whole lot. Okay, so we talked about knowledge. Let's talk about those of you on the experience side of this. And I want to start with this phrase to start. Experience doesn't equal knowledge. Now, we flipped it before and we said knowledge doesn't equal experience, and I believe that's true. But the flip side of this is experience doesn't equal knowledge. The best way I could think to sum this up, potentially offensive to some people, is that's why a old, out-of-shape football coach can be an incredible football coach. I'm thinking of two football coaches in my head right now. Maybe you know if you are a little bit into NFL. And again, I say football. We have an international crowd, so I'm talking about the football that you use your hands and throw a ball, not the football that you kick the ball with your feet, right? Which it's America for you. We use a term that makes no sense. But thinking of two coaches right now that are very, very well-known coaches. One which could arguably, that is such a hard word to say, arguably be probably the greatest NFL coach of all time. And then another guy who has a very successful team, who are both older gentlemen that are a little on the larger side of things. I can't imagine they are very, very good football players. So if we looked at them and we said, Mr. Bill, Mr. Andy, we'd like you to go out there and play some football. Now, I may be way off in this. They may be fantastic football players, and I'm completely judging them based on their age and their weight. But I'd have to imagine that they are not going to be the best football players. But you take them off the field, and because of their knowledge of the game, they are incredible coaches, and they're coaching incredible teams. Now, paired with that, again, is the fact that they have a lot of experience coaching and teaching, and so they have applied their knowledge, they put it into practice, they've exposed themselves to different contexts and experiences, but they're very heavy on the knowledge and less on the actual experience of getting out there. So here's something, talking to the experienced people, let's just bear with me for a moment. When you're heavy on the experience and low on the knowledge, you tend to get stuck in a rut. You tend to get stuck in, this is the way we do it. You have your process, you have your software that you use, you have a process that works. You're out on the road running tracks, you've been getting paid to do this for many years, and some new punk kid comes along showing you this other software, wants you to start using it, and you push back and you hesitate because you go, you have no clue the experience I have. You have no clue who I've ran tracks for. You have no clue all the different things I've done, and you push that person away. Well, I see that happen even in my own life, where there's times where I am hesitant to try a new software, to try a new MIDI controller, to try a new process, a new way in Ableton Live, because I've done this for years and years and years. And I have a process that I've taught people for many years that are applying in many different contexts that I know works. And so a lot of times I'm very hesitant to change. I'm very hesitant to opening the doors and trying something new, right? And so I think those of us that are a little heavier on the experience side and less on the knowledge side, I think we tend to be stuck in our ways. We tend to think, oh, I'm not going to try something new. I've got my process. I know it works. So here's a couple of pieces of encouragement for those of you that tend to be a little higher on the experience side than the knowledge side. And again, this is a hard thing to talk about. When I talk about these football coaches, they're very high on knowledge. They're probably lower on the side of actually being out on the field playing football, or at least they can't right now, probably in their current stage of life. But they have a lot of experience coaching, so they have both. And I think a good place to be is to have both. But let's talk about, again, just strip away that truth that we should have a little bit of both. Let's talk for those of us that are heavier on the experience side, lighter on the knowledge side. What do I have for you? Number one, experience doesn't mean you understand why. That's super important. Experience doesn't mean you understand why, okay? Number two, spend time focusing on why, not just how. Here's what I see a lot of folks, again, that are high on the experience level, is they have their process, it works, their computer isn't buggy, things just work really, really well. But what they tend to avoid doing is stopping and taking time to understand why they work really well. When someone wants to introduce something new, they push back because it's different. It's going to break their perfect system with no issues, which is a good thing to a certain extent. But what they miss is the opportunity to explore something new, to go, why is it that this thing works or doesn't work? I think it's why sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I'll post something on YouTube and someone will say, oh, I hope Ableton fixed that bug because it's been buggy and hasn't worked for 10 years. And you go, when was the last time you used Ableton? And maybe they used some version of Ableton that 10 years ago had some bug that crashed on their specific keyboard, but they're so stuck on their experience side and they're so stuck in their ways that they're afraid to dig in and go, okay, why did Ableton crash 10 years ago? Oh, it was all in my particular setup. Oh, maybe I'm actually doing something wrong. Maybe it would be beneficial for me to learn more about this, to learn why, to then realize I could integrate this into my setup, right? So number one, experience doesn't mean you understand why something's happening. So number two, spend time focusing on why, not just how. Number three, stop and think about it. I think this is hardest for my friends that are out on the road running tracks. And I say this often. I am currently in a portion of my life, a time of my life where I'm kind of in a lab environment. I mean, I'm in a studio surrounded by gear. I've got 3 or 4 pieces of gear on the way right now to prepare for some new videos, to dive deep into some courses. And I have an incredibly blessed and privileged life to have access to that stuff, to spend time learning about it, and pairing that with my experience and best practices and what I know is the best way to approach using gear, what works and what doesn't work. But I have a really blessed opportunity to be in my office to try out an audio interface, whereas a lot of my friends that are out on the road 10 weeks in a row on a tour, they don't have the time to try out a new audio interface because their butt is on the line and tracks have to work night after night for 10 weeks straight in a row. And if they don't, they get fired and go home. They don't have the opportunity to just stop and think about it. And they don't have the opportunity to stop and go, we're doing this really complicated thing. I wonder if we could strip this back and make this simple. Or we're doing this really simple thing. I wonder if there'd be a benefit to us to move to Dante, to start using Dante, something like that. I know not everyone has that privilege and that opportunity, but whenever you can find it, a weekend off, take a couple weeks off if you can, or when you're not on a gig currently, take that time to really stop and think about it. Stop to think about your rig to understand why it's working and why it doesn't. And number 4, I think this is super important for those of us that are high on the experience level. And I want to give a shout out to my buddy, Mike McKnight. Mike is literally probably the godfather of playback. He's the role of a playback tech simply would not exist if it was not for Mike. Everyone can agree on that. You could say, well, this person maybe used it before Mike, this person did, this band, but every single person can agree, if you have ever been paid to run playback in any environment, you have one man to thank for that, and that's Mike McKnight. And here's something that I love about Mike. Mike became, I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this, but Mike became a From Studio Stage subscriber, paid From Studio Stage subscriber. I didn't give him access to the site for free. I don't know, 3 years ago now, maybe 2 years ago now. It was early in the From Studio Stage world. And what continually amazes me about Mike, literally the guy that is top of his game. I mean, no one knows more about playback or is more experienced about playback than Mike. There's probably 5 people on one hand you could count that have similar experience to Mike, and even that they are nowhere close to Mike. Mike is a guy who's been a digital performer guy for years, knows it inside and out. I think has shaped a lot of how that software was developed. He's shaped and developed helped shape and develop a lot of hardware components that are used in the playback world. And Mike continually, at least a couple times a year, emails me and asks me a question about Ableton, whether he's happy about this or this approach in Ableton or not. He's diving deep, man. Mike, of anyone I know, a better example of anyone I know, could just sit back and cross his arms and live out the rest of his life being stuck in his ways doing his thing. And he's someone who's continually trying to learn. What's a better audio interface? What's a better way to connect? What can Ableton do that DP can't do? Pushing Ableton to the point where he goes, can it do this? Can it not do that? But he's continually asking questions. And there's nothing more humbling to me, and truly, truly humbling, than to have a legend, a genius like Mike McKnight ask my opinion on something or how to do something. And it's a model and it's example to me for years and years to come of the importance of humility and the importance of continually trying to grow and learn. So if you're someone that's heavy on the experience side, be like Mike, do what Mike does. And no, not Michael Jordan, Mike McKnight. And continually try to grow and learn, right? So navigating this knowledge experience kind of paradox, if you will, or whatever the best word there is, I think is actually pretty easy. I think we have to understand we have to have both knowledge and experience at the same time. Again, if you're heavy on the knowledge side, get yourself experience. If you're heavy on the knowledge side, expose yourself to different contexts. If you're, we have to have both of these, but if you're heavy on the experience side, continually expose yourself to new learning. Stop and think about it. Obsess with why, not just how. And I think if we can all together kind of work on those things, and you'll probably find in yourself bits and pieces of that, right? Again, as I'm talking, I can go, well, that makes me high on the knowledge, ladder. But then we're talking about experience, I go, well, that makes me high on the experience ladder. Well, I think about all those at the same time, process those and go, in what ways am I high on knowledge and low on experience? And again, expose yourself to new opportunities. In what ways am I high on experience and low on knowledge? Expose yourself to new learning. Continually try to grow, continue to try to learn. A great way to continue to try to learn and to grow is subscribe to the From Studio Stage YouTube channel, hit the bell icon so you see when we go live. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave us a rating and review. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so you see new episodes when they come out every single Monday. And then Tuesday through Sunday, we got brand new content on the From Studio Stage channel. So again, if you're looking to learn, I can promise you're not going to find a place that has better or more content on how to use Ableton Live on stage than From Studio to Stage. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for your support. Thanks for being a part of the community. Let's see, I think, okay, we got one more episode, then we get into December. So we're almost in the last month of the year. Let's finish strong, man. Let's really buckle down, commit to learn something new, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye.